Micro frontends.
All right, it's great to have you here. Happy to have Ward here, MengMeng and Eka. We are currently working on an engagement where we do microservices and micro frontends. So that's the topic for the day. Great to have you here.
Good to
Let
be
me
here.
first ask a question. Why, why do we need to have micro frontends? We have microservices. We talked about that. Why is it that we need micro frontends then?
I don't think we need micro frontends. I think micro frontends did help us though. What happens in other projects, what we've seen in other projects, is that people spend a lot of time modularizing the backend and creating very individual and autonomous teams that can work on autonomous part of the front end, but still in the end, everything is displayed and rendered by one big front end application. And that becomes then the monolith, the front end monolith. So you have all the advantages of autonomous team, but only for the backend. So I think it's a logical next step to say we're also going to modularize the front end and give the autonomy for the front end also to the teams. So in our example, when we started, we wanted to get running pretty quickly with 4 different teams, and in order to avoid running into conflicts the whole time, we basically gave each team a very specific part of the front end, and we thought about a way to bring this all together. And I don't think we had to do that, but it made the teams very autonomous also for front end code. More and more of the code that we write is actually running in a browser, right? I think Eric is one of the most senior tech leaders in Germany, who gave a talk once about how more than half of the code that we write these days is actually run in the browser. So the browser became, instead of just like a way to visualize the data, it became almost like a platform, right? So it makes total sense to also put compartmentalization there. At the time, there was indeed, like you said, there was nothing established out of the box that we could use. So we developed our own library, but now this totally changed. A lot of companies have adopted this pattern, and there's a lot of options. I would not recommend anybody today, when they would start a new project, to start from scratch. For us at the time, it was a good solution because there was not that many established solutions yet. But now there's, for example, Zalando, who has a whole suite of tools to do this, called Mosaic, I believe. There's a lot of different libraries.
Yeah, I would say once the micro frontends are already established, the different teams, they actually don't really come in contact with that, because this is exactly because of the reason that it enables us to work autonomously. We don't need to engage with the layer which composes all of the different micro frontends. Everyone can work on their own micro frontends independently of the other teams. So they can basically simply concentrate on what they need in their own team. Like they can work with their experience designer on how it is supposed to look like on their part of the micro frontend, and then implement the feature the way they need it exactly there. And then they just deploy it to production, and it will all be composed together. And yeah, for the user, it is not distinguishable where the micro frontend of one service starts and where it ends. So the transitions are seamless, but the teams are still able to work independently. So the composition of the different micro frontends are done in a way so that the user will not notice that they are entering one micro frontend and leaving another one. Yeah, in our cases, they usually, the micro frontends themselves usually don't communicate directly with each other, but via the backends. And also the way we slice those micro frontends together with the backends, with the microservices, are so that they are cohesive in their domain. So usually there are really little cases where there's a need for the micro frontend from one service to communicate with another, because just purely from the business logic, it's not really logical, because the way we have sliced it vertically, it makes sense to keep those micro frontends with the microservice, with their respective microservice together. And if another micro frontend really needs it, then often their backends also need it. So it also makes sense to have this communication on the backend side.
Usually that's how it's being built, because in my experience looking at the OTR project in a whole, we're actually implementing SCS, self-contained system, where the micro front ends will actually communicate to its microservice. So in this way, we actually remove the mental blocks that we have. Instead of trying to understand the whole monolith architecture, we can just concentrate in one business domain.
And I think this is a very important philosophical idea behind this concept. We really believe in autonomous teams. We believe that it is much more rewarding for people to work on a feature or a business requirement end to end. We also believe it makes people faster because there is little or less dependencies. We are able to build more quality this way. So we try to build teams that they are, like you say, able to convert a business requirement, something that makes sense to a user from the beginning till the end, and not just creating the button or not just processing to the database. So the smallest unit of work that we talk about, a feature, is something that by itself adds business value. We will never have a feature, we will never have a requirement saying save this field to the database or add this button to this page. It will be something like persist the name of the customer, because that by itself makes sense. The saving to database or adding of the button are just means to an end. And by having this autonomous teams, which is helped by our micro frontend, microservice architecture, we can actually achieve that. So this is a diagram where you can see that in our case we have one central component called frame, which is loaded as the first thing when a user opens the application. Frame then bootstraps the application by going to all the different components and asking for their code, so to say. So their part of the application is actively loaded by the one component that you loaded first. And when all these things send back their data or their code, Frame renders them in a way that we define. And the cool thing is that Frame can then make pages that consist, like MengMeng and Eka said earlier, where it's very seamless, right? You see one page that is not coming from one service, but it's actually coming from 5 different services. And this is possible because the level of like the units that these services are sharing are not pages, but are React components. These React components are registered. One frame loads all these different parts, and then the frame composes this together and brings this to the user. So there's this one orchestrator, if you want, or composer service that brings everything together.
We're also doing this in at runtime, this integration of the composition of the different micro frontends. So this also helps with the team autonomy. So the integration of the different parts of the front end will happen in the browser of the user at runtime. So even if one of our teams has done some changes to add a feature, they can just deploy it, and we don't need to redeploy this composition service, and it will just be there once the user goes there.
Like I said earlier, I don't think right now there is a need to write this yourself. We did this 3.5 years ago because at the time it was quite new. I know of a few approaches. I think generally it's always a good idea to check the ThoughtWorks tech radar. There's always a kind of overview of technologies that we recommend to use, and there's definitely a few about micro frontends. So I would recommend you to read through that tech radar for these choices. I think it is quite. I mean, you shouldn't underestimate it. I think it is. There is an initial setup, right? It's a bit like microservices. You don't do microservices because they make it easier for you to write software. You do microservices because you then can organize yourself around a complex project with little dependencies between teams. So you shouldn't start an application from scratch if you're like a developer by yourself. Maybe there's also some advantages from using microservices, but you should really be careful by introducing this from now on for any kind of project. It makes sense in bigger projects when you have autonomous teams, when you want to have autonomous teams, but there's definitely some cost related to that, and there's definitely some extra. Yeah, I mean, you need to
right. Also, that comes with it.
Exactly.
There's some downsides and challenges with that. Yeah, let's elaborate on that. Is that just complexity that you add to your application, or is it performance related? What are the costs that you have when you go down the route with micro frontends?
From the composition layer, that part is very, very crucial. So if that part fails, then the different other parts of the micro frontend can't be composed anymore, and then the user won't be able to use the site. So this is one single point of failure, which is very important and needs to be done well. The different teams, they can basically implement the design however they want if nobody gives them any special requirements or frameworks to work with. Something that we do, that we have introduced not right from the start of the project, but at a later point, is a design system, a component library, from which the different teams can draw certain components like buttons, also colors, spacing, so that the design of the whole system is the same. This is also the reason why the experience on our product is seamless, because it is designed so that it is, that it fits well together. Yes, it has happened that, for example, buttons on one service and one micro frontend look different in another one. And through adding this component library, they are same across the different micro frontends, as an example.
It's also easier to reuse, right? If one team develops, for example, a date picker, there's some extra functionality, some logic that another team can then just reuse by depending on this component library and basically plug and play that component into their page. We even at some points we even make it a bit more elaborate and have some services expose components that can then be put into different pages. These components are not just UI components, they actually contain the logic to also talk to their own backends. So then you have a page which different components are talking to different backends. That's another possibility. We don't use this enough at the moment, but this is also possible.
So this is the component library that we use to actually integrate several components, centralized components that we use in OTR. And at the moment, it's being maintained by our front-end guild, which is in OTR. And all of these components are heavily maintained within the project itself. And as you can see, these are all the reusable components that we can use. Like, for example, this one is button. And then it has its own characteristics. Like, for example, it has primary button, and it has also the secondary button. And also these are the displays that you have when you are, for example, disabling a button, or when you are making the button enable to click, and then it will trigger an event. And all of these components are being stored in our private repository, and it has the browser support, and also it shows you on how to use it. If, let's say, you are building a new micro front end and then you want to reuse some of the stuff that we already have here in component library.
I recall when we created this component library that we really made sure that we addressed it to the users. The users of the component library are our developers. So we treated this as a product itself and really developed this in the usual agile way, really trying to understand the users, talking to them, getting feedback from them, interviewing them, checking out what worked, making it really easy so that we did not push the use of the component library to the developers, but we saw the other way. We really wanted them to have it really easy for them and a great user experience to use the component library. And would you say this is something that as a developer is fun right now? Did we succeed into building this as a way that helps you as a developer?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think by having the component library, we are also able to concentrate on the more challenging tasks, because those things which are there, they were before just copy-pasted from a style guide or copied from another micro frontend which has already implemented it. And it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't exactly the most fun thing to do. And by having this component library, we can just add it to our micro frontends and then import it. And then it's, the usage is very, very simple, and we can really concentrate on on the difficult tasks which are more interesting for us to work on.
And then you'll see the effect of it without having to deploy, without having to hot reload your code, and that's something that I really appreciate as well.
So it's not just a static page that you see or a book that you could read. It's something quite dynamic where we can experiment.
Yeah. So we collaborate with the XD also to actually build this stuff so they can play around as well if, let's say, we publish a new component. And then we can have a quick feedback lifecycle between the XD and also the devs.
I think it is a very good overview on Martin Fowler's website, martinfowler.com. If you search there for micro frontends, there is a very good introduction that I would recommend everybody to take as a starting point.
There's also micro-frontends.org, which also has a lot of information.